Good morning. Afternoon. Excuse me, good afternoon. Let me just get my mic over here. There we go. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Apologies, I'm just over here on the other thing. Hopefully, Dr. Joan Heals, hopefully you're able to find me on Facebook. Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. This is Dr. Shannon Coates, and I am, my pronouns are she, her, they, them, and I am coming to you live from the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, and the Wendake Neowensio peoples up here north of Toronto. There we go. All right, got that going on. Terrific. Hey, how you doing? I wasn't going to have live office hours today. It was not in my schedule. I sort of have a schedule scheduled out for all of the times that I am going to do live office hours, and this particular week was not on the schedule originally because it is March break here in my part of the world, meaning, one of my kids is not in school today, and so I thought, maybe I'll just take that week off. And then what happened? And then the wonderful John Henney, who, if you are not following John on, hi Christy, if you're not following John on YouTube, listening to his podcast, if you're not following John yet, please do that. It's a wonderful educator, especially in contemporary styles, and has an incredibly has a terrific way of putting together, explaining concepts, complex concepts in sort of like 10-minute chunks. It's lovely, big fan. And so John did a video last week. Maybe it was the week before. I don't know. At some point, John did a video, I think it was last week, where he talked about his experience as a teacher with a vocal injury. So he talked about the fact that he's been teaching a long time, all that stuff, and the fact that he would not have come forward, if you will, to talk about this, except for the fact that a colleague of ours, another voice teacher, had been saying some stuff that, to the effect of, I know a voice teacher who you would never want to listen to, and how can they possibly teach? Their voice is so terrible, blah, blah, blah. And so John felt the need to do this sort of public. John didn't know whether that post was about him or not, and perhaps it was, and perhaps it wasn't. I hope it wasn't, and I hope none of those. Anyway, we'll get into it. And so John felt the need to do a public explanation, if you will, just to do a video and say, hey, look, I've had a vocal injury. I am on the mend. I didn't know. I knew something was going on, and so I knew that there were things that were not working the way that I would have liked them to work, and I didn't know what was going on, and I went to several people to figure that out, and finally, I think he's been working with Carrie Obert, another fabulous, wonderful voice professional, and who was the one to, I think, if I remember correctly, who was the one to, diagnose what was actually happening, and now they're working through it. And so he felt the need to sort of come clean, if you will, because of the things that were being said online about how could you possibly be, who could possibly want to take voice lessons with someone who sounds so terrible. essentially. And this sort of disparaging attitude toward someone by a colleague who is making these kind of comments and remarks about the quality of teaching based on their perceived quality of the voice. And so I wanted to do just a little short little kind of chat about that, because there is this culture, if you will, in our industry, in the voice teaching industry. There is this culture around having had, a performance career, having done this particular kind of work, being able to sing in certain styles, having a certain level of facility in specific sounds and being able to create specific sounds. And there's this culture that sort of celebrates and assumes that if you had a career, for example, as, if you had a big opera performance career, then you will be by default able to teach effectively because you had a career and because you have demonstrated that you can sing. And this is obviously more in sort of the Western classical side of things. And often in academia, as we know, often voice teachers come into academia on the basis, or they're invited into faculties because they've had a successful singing career. So often we have voice teachers in faculties who have never demonstrated their teaching, aside from maybe a master class or workshops, or coaching. They've done coaching, but they've never demonstrated their actual teaching skills, right? And so there's this assumption around the fact that, well, you can clearly sing, and so you must be able to teach. And as I've talked about before, there's so many other things that go into that. Music faculties are always, explaining to the administration why it costs so much to run a music faculty, because it really does. And so if I can get this big name singer into the faculty, they're going to attract more students. And so then we have, we're better, we're, fiscally better and all that stuff. So there's a lot that goes into hiring teachers who have had based on their singing career, versus based on whether or not they can teach, right? And in some cases, in many cases, they will come into singing faculties, or come into music faculties, and the audition process to like the job interview doesn't involve them teaching. So they do a recital and maybe they do a master class, but no one actually sees them teaching, and they have no proven record of teaching. I mean, it just, anyway. And then the same thing kind of happens on the other side too this happens in music theater as well, but it also happens on sort of the other side in popular musics, in jazz. I know, right? So this happens on the other side as well, where at music schools, folks get hired, let's say music schools, folks get hired because they were in a band, and so you were in a band, and so now you can come and teach at this music school, and obviously that's not like necessarily faculties, but like at this music school, and again, you have great skills, and so clearly you're going to be a great teacher. And as well, this happens in our independent voice studios too, right? So what happens? Well, I folks asked me to teach them voice lessons simply because they had heard me singing. So people, when I was singing, and this is before I was teaching, when I was singing, people would ask me for voice lessons. Oh, can you give me voice lessons? Like I know, you're such a good singer. Can you give me voice lessons? And so, and independent, this happens in independent studios too, where there's this assumption, and in our culture, there's this assumption around, well, you can sing really well, and I like how you can sing, and so you should be able to teach me. And that's a little mixed up, especially when it comes to, like in the instance I was talking about here at the beginning with John Henney, when it comes to us as voice teachers judging other teachers and ourselves, judging the effectiveness of their teaching by our perception of their singing. So that gets really messy and not healthy. That's not healthy. It's not healthy for anybody. It's not healthy for the teacher, for the culture. It's not healthy for the people who are paying $1 bajillion. Oh, Lindsay, that is such a good question. Let me get to that. Yeah, that is really a great question, because how do we judge whether someone is a good voice teacher, an effective voice teacher, right? Oh, I hadn't even thought about going to that, but I might go there in a second. Yeah, it's such a good question. Okay. So it's not healthy. It's not healthy for the folks who are buying into this in our academic institutions, and who exactly, yeah, as singers we have singing demos, but we don't have teaching demos necessarily, right? So true. And also, like, who's judging the teaching? Oh my gosh, there's so much in there. Oh my gosh. Okay. Like, who's saying what good teaching is, right? Like, this might not be the live for that. I'm not sure how much time I have. Anyway, so this is unhealthy for the singers who are going into institutions based on and expecting the thing that the institution, yeah, nicely done, Lindsay, and expecting the thing that the institution seems to be promising based on their perception that because someone has had a career, they are going to be able to teach me how to do the same thing, right? And or this is also so unhealthy because parents, in our independent voice studios as well, parents come in and say, well, I search out as, a voice teacher as an adult because they can do the thing that I want to do. And so again, there's this assumption that just because I say I'm a teacher, I'm going to be a teacher. So that's not healthy. And also, we're selling something. It's kind of a lie what we're selling. It's kind of not like we're selling something that we can't necessarily deliver on. So don't get me wrong. I think one of the things for me, one of the things that is a foundational skill as a voice teacher, and one of the things that I work with voice teachers to get better at is to a principle that I call demonstrate over describe. And there are lots of parts to this, and I've talked about this quite a bit in other live office hours, so you can, take a look through that as well. And so part of, especially if you are at the beginning stages of your teaching career, and especially if you are working with folks who are not necessarily well trained and who haven't been working very long on their voice, that demonstrate over describe is such a foundational principle, I believe, in how in being an effective teacher, because it. But here is the thing. Here's what happens. People, when I say let's work to demonstrate rather than describe, people say yes, but I don't want the singers I'm working with to all sound like me. Right, I get it. But here's what we're doing when we're demonstrating. We are not demonstrating so that the singer can sound like us and create the same sound. We are demonstrating an ease of coordination. Let me say it again. I'm not demonstrating a specific tonal outcome so that the singer I'm working with will sound like me and make that same sound. I'm demonstrating an ease of coordination or a specific set of coordinations, which isn't really a word, but let's go with it anyway. I'm demonstrating ease and coordination so that the singer I'm working with can intuitively, can instinctively, can rely on their bodies to also, and it isn't really intuitively, instinctively, it's I am showing the way for the body to also then have that ease and coordination. So what am I showing? I'm giving a roadmap. Brains like to have a little bit of something to go toward, right? And they need to have something, they like to have an example of what it is I'm trying to do, especially when we're learning a motor skill, so that my body, I don't have to think through all of the things. That is an inefficient way to learn a motor skill, to think through it first. So a more efficient way to learn a motor skill is to see the skill performed with ease, and then to start to find that same ease of coordination in my own body. So when we're talking about demonstration in the voice studio, this is a pedagogical tool, but the pedagogical tool is not dependent on whether or not I can sing well or whether or not I have good singing. The pedagogical tool is effective if I can demonstrate a specific coordination. Hopefully I'm making this distinction clear, right? Me being able to sing well, me being able to do an aria, me being able to, belt, me being able to whatever it is, all of those things, me being able to perform well, that is not an indication of whether or not I can demonstrate a specific coordination well. So in the voice studio, why am I singing in the voice studio? I'm not singing to show off my good singing. I am singing for a very specific purpose in the voice studio. Yes, exactly. This is also part of it, right, Lindsay? So Lindsay's saying it's also good for students' morale and for their hope to know that the skills and coordination are within reach for themselves. So me singing an aria or me doing a role or, me blah, 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 learning, having a set or whatever, me doing a character, that is not going to translate into me teaching well or effectively in the voice studio, because that is a whole bunch of coordinations all at once. That is a massive set of coordinations that, especially if I am not understanding how to teach effectively, I am not going to be able to, is going to get me into the curse of the expert, where it all feels like easy. It all feels so easy, and I don't even remember what all of the specific coordinations are that are required to get to those, to get to this whole role, to get to that aria, to get to that, to be able to sing that song in whatever way. All of those big, meta coordinations, all of the coordinations together that are now instinctive to me as a performer are useless to me as a teacher if I am not able to demonstrate the specific minute coordinations that are the building blocks of the entire thing put together. And all of those building blocks, they can all be demonstrated individually. They can all be demonstrated. Coordination can be demonstrated with a vocal injury or with perhaps not the same, me not being able to sing. Let me give you an example. I've worked with 1,001 Western classical sopranos, maybe more. I've worked with a lot of Western classical sopranos to expand, develop, coordinate above their high C. So up into, if you want to call it whistle tone, and up, C to F, and then above into whistle tone. Lots and lots and lots of them. And I have a usable high C. I have a unreliable high D. Above that, I don't have much. I don't have much. And that's partially because of the way my vocal folds, the physiology of my vocal folds. But, so above that, I don't have much. I cannot demonstrate whistle tone. I literally am physiologically incapable of creating whistle tone because of some stuff with my folds. So I cannot demonstrate it. I've worked with a lot of sopranos who now have usable, reliable, high, all of the high notes. Why? Because I can demonstrate those an octave lower. And I can demonstrate the coordination of it. I don't have to demonstrate the actual notes. I don't have to sing the actual notes. I don't have to be good at the actual notes. I don't have to be able to sing Queen of the Night in order for the singer I'm working with to be able to sing Queen of the Night. So we get this yes, the curse of the expert is so real, and it's astounding how many musicians wanting to be teachers are not cognizant of this reality. Yes, that too, right? The skills required to mindfully educate, coach, support, etc. are massively underrated. Yes. This is exactly what I'm saying, Christy. That's so underrated. Because, again, we get into this culture of well, if you can do it, then blah, blah, blah. And if you don't sound good, then you can't, good by my definitions, then you clearly can't teach effectively. And I want to also pull out, what does this mean? If I believe this, what does this mean for what do I think then about my colleagues who are chronically ill, for example, who have chronic illnesses that prevent them from perhaps having a clear voice sometimes, that prevent them from being able to demonstrate, from being able to have had a career in whatever genre they would have liked to have had that career in. What do I think about my colleagues who have other barriers that have prevented them from being able to execute some of these sounds or some of these styles in the way that I think they should be able to execute them in order to teach? Do I just think they're a bad teacher? Is that what I really think about my colleagues? Hopefully not. Hopefully I don't think that. I mean, obviously some people do, because that's what happened with John. Or at least someone has said that. So yes, being an effective teacher has very little, there's what's it called? Correlation? What's it called? where you take the where the stats mean something and you can get a meaningful conclusion from the data. I can't remember what it is. Uh, We're trying to draw a meaningful conclusion. Correlation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Correlation. Exactly. So we're trying to draw a meaningful conclusion about somebody's teaching from our perception of their singing, and there is no meaningful conclusion to draw. There just isn't. So let me give a couple of possible exceptions, because we hear this all the time too, right? Like, well, if you haven't had a career, how could you possibly, or if you haven't, like, prepared, if you haven't prepared a role, how could you possibly coach someone to prepare a role? If you haven't done microphone singing, how could you possibly, prepare someone to have a career in microphone singing, right? We hear this all the time. If you haven't done this thing, how could you possibly prepare someone to have a career? That's a hot take. Thanks, Christy. Yes. Yeah. No, that's exactly what I'm saying, Mike. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Mike is saying, I think on the flip side, we automatically think the best singer will make the best teacher. That's exactly right. So same thing. We draw these conclusions in the other way, right? And it's not always the case. In fact, there's no evidence. That is not evidence, right? Again, same thing. Like, we make these conclusions. We try to draw meaningful conclusions about whether or not someone is an effective or not effective teacher from what we perceive about their singing, right? So if we try to make that relationship work, and it's not a thing. Like, those things are not true. So when people say that, when people say, well, if you didn't have a career in XYZ, or if you've never done XYZ, how will you possibly be able to teach someone to do it? And there are some really faulty assumptions going on here with these kinds of statements. First of all, we're painting every single teacher with the same brush. So what we're saying with that statement is, every single teacher out there is preparing every single one of their students to have a career in opera, say. Or every single teacher out there is preparing every single one of their students to be able to gig. Every single teacher out there is preparing every single one of their students to be able to have to go to Broadway. That's what that assumes, right? So it assumes, I have heard, especially Western classical teachers in academia. Now, I haven't heard this from someone in quite a while, but I'll say I have heard this come out of teachers' mouths, where they say, well, if you haven't had a career in teaching in opera, how could you possibly teach someone else how to sing opera? This is an assumption, because what you're teaching are people at your school who want to have a career in opera. So all of the people you're working with in your studio have one goal in mind. They're all coming to you. I mean, you think they are, they don't all, but you think that your job, or you think that all of the singers that you're working with are coming to you to have a career in opera. And because you had yes, Christy, it's also partially the way we've messaged, right? And so you think that you having had a career in opera is what is making you the effective teacher. In that case, if all of your students are with you because they want to have a career in opera, like a high-level career in opera, they want to be a professional opera singer, and you have not been a professional opera singer, yes, there may be some challenges there. It may be challenging. You may not be able to coach them in specific things, but that's okay. So long as you're honest about it and you say, hey, like, I didn't do XYZ, and so I'm going to send you to so and so who did to coach the last whatever in that thing. And that is not the experience of your average independent voice teacher, right? That is not the experience. The average independent voice teacher, our typical independent voice teacher, is very rarely at the final stages of working with someone. So is very rarely working with people who are at the final stages of their career, who are just about to go into, or who are who are on their last stages of moving into their career. Your typical independent voice teacher is generally working with, who are we working with? We're working with adult avocational singers. We're working with lots of kids. We're working with teenagers, lots of music theater, lots of rock pop, lots of, maybe there's some, Western classical training going on in there. Folks who, and lots of choral singers, and maybe not lots, but lots, there can be adult singers who want to do an audition for the local musical, the local theater club, all of it, like this vast range of singers. And very rarely are we in a typical independent voice teacher scenario. Very rarely are we the last teacher before they go to, or the final coach before they go to their, where they have all of the coordinations already in place that they need in order to go into, the stages of a professional career, or the first stages of a career. So what does that mean for me as an independent voice teacher? It means that I need to be a chameleon of sorts, of course. And it means that possibly, if I did have a career as an opera singer, or if I did have a career as a rock pop singer, or if I did work specifically in music theater, possibly what that means is when I start teaching, I may not actually be a very useful teacher for some of these other singers that I'm working with. I may not be a very effective teacher for some of these other singers I'm working with until I start to work on some of those other skills myself, because I'm so far into that curse of the expert, right? What makes an effective independent voice teacher? Someone who, in my opinion, not someone who has had a career and can demonstrate and do a role and all that stuff, but someone who has enough understanding of functional singing, of the options we have, the ways we can use our voice, who has the understanding of all of the different ways we can use our voice, and then can support the singers we're working with to allow them to have options as well. So that means that I will want to demonstrate some of these ease of coordinations in various different ways, for sure. But does it mean that I have to have can I do it with an injured voice? I mean, obviously with the caveats that you don't want to further injure your voice and all that stuff. But yes, I absolutely can. Can I be an effective voice teacher and do effective demonstrations in a typical independent voice studio where I'm offering options to singers and I'm working with them to find what options and coordinations work best for them? 100%. 100%. And in fact, being a good singer may actually impede that, because I don't have, I have this curse of the expert where I don't have the understanding of what the options are, and I don't remember what it feels like to not be able to do all of these coordinations really well. Christy is saying, my favorite coaching experience to date was with the lead singer of a Japanese screamo band. Can I scream? No. Was he able to gain and access new coordinations and accomplish the things he wanted? Yes. Right? And it was fun. I know. Exactly. And it's fun. Yeah. So, and then I want to just go back a little bit. So, I don't know, Lindsay, if that answers your question a little bit, where you're saying if someone is looking for a private teacher, an independent teacher for a child, for example, could you ask them to audit a lesson or something to that effect? Yes. I love the idea of auditing. Um, it's when in an independent studio, right? Where I love that idea, and I love the idea of having like an open studio day where prospective clients are able to come in, and singers and able to just come in and like see how you work, see what the singers are like, what meaning like personality wise, like what the culture of the studio is, see what kind of teaching you do. I love the idea of sort of having that open studio. This is also the reason that I often recommend that folks do a 6 week trial periods, trial in quotes because it's not free, but a 6 week like exploratory period where you're working together to see whether it's going to be a good fit or not, and also to see whether I as the teacher can offer the things that you would like, and also to see whether or not you as the singer like the way that I work, right? Like this is I would love for things to be a little bit more open and exploratory rather than us sort of like, holding on to our territory, if you will. Um, so yes. Also, the other thing on this is also like, what happens if I am, so I talked about chronic illness. What do we think about the teachers who are, who are no longer able to demonstrate, or who no longer have a career, or who are no longer able to sing in a specific way because they're, now in their 80s? So many wonderfully effective voice teachers who can no longer demonstrate the same sounds that, or whose demonstrations are not about the sound. They're not about whether or not I can sing the sound. They're about, here's the coordination we're looking for. Here's a suggestion for the coordination. So effective teaching is not about whether or not I can sing the thing, necessarily. In some instances, perhaps. If you're sort of like a finishing coach, if you're perhaps the last person to, not the last person, but if you're the person who is like working with a singer to find some specific things that you have done, and this for me, this is like, and also, oh my gosh, if we are saying like you can't teach because you didn't have a career, because how could you possibly coach them in their career if you didn't have a career? Go to a career coach. What are you talking about? If you want a voice teacher, go to a voice teacher. If you want a career coach, go to a career coach. And yes, there are lots of folks who have crossover and who have expertise in both ways and who are able to, work with career coach. But like, go to a career coach. Anyway, I think this gets so messed up in our heads. It just gets so messed up, and we draw these conclusions about whether or not someone is an effective teacher. Do you think there are people who think you can't be a good teacher if you took a 5-year hiatus from teaching? Oh yeah, there are lots of people out there who think like you're not going to be an effective teacher if you took time off, or you're not going to be an effective teacher if you, some of the most wonderful teachers I have worked with, and I have some of the most intuitive, wonderful teachers who I've worked with, are teachers who didn't do a Western classical degree, don't have that in their background at all. And so those teachers are not teaching Western classical singing, that's fine, right? You're allowed to be like, hey, this isn't a thing that's in my wheelhouse, so I'm not teaching it. But those teachers are teaching options that if I put those things into place may lead me toward a teacher. If I wanted to sing Western classical, I can go to a teacher who works in that style. Sorry, I got a little cut off there, a little squirreled. Yeah, 5-year hiatus. No, I absolutely. One of the things. Give me a sec. Formulating thoughts. One of the things that I think has helped to make me a more effective teacher is the fact that I have a more effective voice teacher is the fact that I have done lots of things outside of the singing realm. I'm not saying that if you only ever were in singing and you only ever did singing, that means that you will not be an effective voice teacher. Do not get me wrong, all right? But I am saying that not singing for a while, not teaching for a while, that is not a barrier to being an effective voice teacher. In fact, in some ways, it may actually be even more useful. It also depends on what you do in those 5 years. My main point here is that we take these things. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, Marla, that's interesting. What do you think about teachers that don't have a desire to find new sounds themselves on their own instrument? I've seen that as a red flag in the past. I want to work with curious coaches. Yeah, I mean, it really depends, right? I mean, I am not going to judge again, it comes back to this, right? I'm not going to judge the effectiveness of a teacher by my perception of what they should or should not be doing, right? Like that isn't the way I'm going to judge the effectiveness of a teacher. If you as a voice teacher are not curious about sounds in your own voice and are not curious, I don't even really know what that looks like. I don't know how you can tell that, but maybe they're not curious about the sounds in their own voice or developing other sounds in their own voice. I feel like so long as you are honest with yourself and your students about that, and you're saying, hey, these are the sounds that I really like, and I really like the way my voice works in this particular way, and so that's the way I'm going to work. And at the same time, I'm happy to offer options for you. I think that can be effective. I can also see that could be very ineffective, and possibly a red flag. Like, it absolutely could be a red flag. And I agree. I absolutely want to work with curious coaches and curious singers and curious teachers. And I also think, like, curiosity looks different in different people too, right? Like, I don't know. It's tricky. It's tricky. I just want to come in here and have the conversation about the fact that we tend to use this causation, correlation thing. We tend to try to judge the effectiveness of a teacher by external parameters that have nothing to do, or that are not useful parameters for judging whether someone is an effective teacher or not. And one of those things that we tend to do is we tend to use whether or not they are a good singer as a judge of whether or not they are an effective teacher. And it's just not it's bad data. It's just bad data. And also, it's our opinion, right? So it's just bad data. Okay, I'm going to get out of here. Continue to think on these things, friends. Just continue to think on these things. Continue to think on the ways that we are judging our colleagues, the ways that we are deciding whether or not someone is a good teacher, effective teacher or not. Continue to just sort of examine the things that we think about ourselves as a voice teacher too, right? There can be so much shame for ourselves as voice teachers around whether or not I'm able to make a sound or whether or not I should know better. And if you feel like you can't, let me add this one little thing at the end. Of course, there's always one little thing. If you feel like you are limited in what you can teach because you aren't sure how to accomplish that coordination in your own body, there's no shame in that. Go ask someone to help you out. Go ask someone to help you figure it out. Book a session with someone to help you figure it out. There's no shame in that. None of us know all the things. 100%. Okay. Let's keep examining that. I'm going to go watch some wonderful teachers teach now. Wonderful young teachers teach now. So we will see. Have a great weekend. I'll see you later. And yep, that's that one. Oops, sorry, still over here. Ending.